Hace mucho tiempo, en una galaxia muy muy lejana... Bueno, en realidad no. La Cueva del Nerd. El podcast con la mejor información de cultura popular, geek, friki, nerd o como le quieras decir. Noticias, reseñas, comentarios y recomendaciones de cómics, películas y series de televisión. Con Héctor Negrete, el Graf. La Cueva del Nerd.
¡Alto! Lois, este no es mi vaso de Batman.
Bienvenidos a una emisión más de esto que es el podcast de La Cueva del Nerd. Yo soy Héctor Negrete, mejor conocido como El Graf. Y en esta ocasión, después de la lamentable noticia que circuló el día de ayer, hemos decidido rescatar la entrevista que en algún momento de la historia La Cueva del Nerd realizó al señor Breyfogle. De hecho, esta entrevista fue realizada por un servidor y por el señor Iker Alonso. Entonces, bueno, ya tiene muchos años, ya que esta entrevista fue realizada en abril de 2012, unos meses antes de que Breyfogle viniera por primera ocasión a la Ciudad de México. Esta entrevista previamente había sido ya lanzada como parte del podcast. Sin embargo, en esta ocasión decidimos mejor presentarles a ustedes el audio original con muchas fallas técnicas, con muchos manotazos en el escritorio del señor Breyfogle, pero bueno, queríamos justamente mantener el audio original de esta entrevista que realizamos en aquellos entonces y que de hecho, bueno, creo que es algo que valía mucho la pena justamente recuperar, ya que pues bueno, en sí la entrevista era como entrevista de vida, de su trabajo, de todo lo que él realizó. Y entonces, pues bueno, justamente por eso decidimos justamente retomar esta entrevista. Si usted necesita buscar la traducción, estaremos compartiendo el texto íntegro de la entrevista en nuestro sitio lacuevadelnerd.com, así para que usted pueda buscarla en caso de que necesite justamente algún apoyo. Así que, pues bueno, sin más, los dejamos con esta, pues bueno, muy larga y muy entretenida entrevista que nos dio el señor Breyfogle allá en 2012, y de alguna u otra manera esto también lo queremos hacer a modo de tributo justamente a este artista que no solamente marcó a una generación gigantesca de fanáticos de Batman, sino particularmente fue un ídolo durante muchos años en el cómic para un servidor. Así que pues los dejamos con esta entrevista de La Cueva del Nerd al señor Breyfogle.
Well, we are here with Mr. Breyfogle.
Hello.
A huge artist for Batman fans.
Yeah, since the 90s, 80s, 90s.
80s, 90s.
In the 80s. First time I drew Batman professionally was 86, I think. Maybe 87, I'm not sure.
And,
I think it was 86, the end of 86.
And as we were saying a few minutes offline, many huge fans of Batman grew with your drawings, and I think most of the Batman fans are very excited about this interview right now.
I was lucky that I got into Batman when I did, just before the Batman movies came out, and when...
Yeah, I was thinking about that. You were in the right place, in the right title, at the time, with a great writer, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Alan and I gelled really well.
Yeah.
Alan Grant and I.
I like to start this interview. How was your life as a kid?
Teenager.
As a teenager, what were you?
You were into sports, comics, trading cards, TV shows, movies.
Not into trading cards. The only trading cards we had back when I was in high school were baseball trading cards, and I wasn't into organized sports. So I wasn't into trading cards. But I was into comics since I was, since before I could read, actually.
Mm-hmm.
My mom used to buy comics for me when we went to the grocery store, and of course I was drawn to Superman and Batman because those were the ones I was familiar with from TV shows. I didn't even discover the Marvel Comics characters until a few years later when those old animated shows came on TV. the ones with minimal animation.
Yeah.
But we moved around a lot when I was a child. So I actually almost every year for a little while there. And I guess that helped me to turn inwards and find my own sources of entertainment because I lost friends, when we moved. And so I latched onto artwork and comic books. And I guess I had a drawing ability because my father had a drawing ability, although he never pursued it professionally. And comics kind of reinforced that, especially when I started seeing some of my favorite artists. Like, my first favorite artist was Neil Adams because he was drawing comics realistically, a lot more so than anybody else at the time, in the late 60s, early 70s. And so that kind of reinforced my drawing ability. And then my mother started taking me to private art lessons when I was 13 years old with a professional artist on weekends. And after a year of that, I decided that I wanted to pursue it professionally. Up till then, I considered it more like a hobby because I was more interested in science. I thought that I considered, when I was a kid, I thought art was a little too frivolous.
Yeah.
It was more like just entertainment, and I thought I had, like everybody else, I wanted to change the world. And I thought, art wasn't really a way to do that. But after a year of those private art lessons, I decided that was what I was best at, and so I should pursue it. Like I said, we moved around a lot when I was a kid, so one of the constants was pop culture, and one of the constants of that was comic books.
Yeah.
And so I started drawing and writing my own comic books when I was in high school. You asked what I was like in high school. Well, by the time I reached high school, we had moved again, and from the Chicago, Illinois area to Upper Michigan, and I didn't really know anybody.
And was a different place.
I had just become a born-again Christian too, which isolated me a little bit further because I was really fanatical about it. And
Okay.
so I really concentrated on my artwork even more and developed that. By the time I graduated high school and went to college, I was getting near professional level, and I was also reading a lot of philosophy and science fiction, and that kind of opened my mind. So I stopped being a fanatical born-again Christian, and when I went to college, and I started sending samples out. Back then, it was before Federal Express, and I sent huge original paintings to DC and Marvel Comics. And at one point, I thought I'd lost them all. It took me like 6 months to get them back because I didn't even include any return postage or packaging. I was pretty naive. But I eventually got them back, and I guess I'm probably going to be segueing into some of your other questions that you haven't even had a chance to answer yet, like how I broke into comics.
Yeah, that's, I think, the next questions.
Well, after I graduated college, we moved again, and I probably would have stayed where I was, except that I had broken my ankle in kind of a rowdy bar accident. And so I went with my family, with my mother and my brother, to California, and that's when I started attending the San Diego Con while I was working as a drafter and a technical illustrator for various California industrial facilities and Air Force bases. I worked at Vandenberg Air Force Base for a while as a technical illustrator, and I worked at Diablo Canyon Nuclear Power Plant before it was up and running. I remember we actually, my carpool had to drive through the protesters to get to work. I felt pretty bad about that, but I needed the job. I was fresh out of college, and it wasn't running yet. Diablo Canyon wasn't running, and if anything, our job was helping to make it safer because we were building new supports for all the conduits in case of an earthquake.
Oh,
so
okay.
That was one of the ways I rationalized my working for the nuclear industry for about a year. But like I said, I started to attend the San Diego Con and showing my work in the amateur art contest. Mike Friedrich from Star Reach, artist and writer representation organization, saw some of my work hanging in one of the shows in the San Diego Con, and he and Sal Amendola and some other editors at DC Comics told me that I should be considering myself professional. I was surprised because I hadn't sold anything, but they said, well, I don't know if they said this, but the attitude was like, if you build it, they will come. In other words, consider yourself professional, and if your work's professional quality, you basically are professional anyway. So I started entering professional shows instead. And shortly thereafter, I started getting work with some independent companies, like First Comics. I drew Whisper for a year. It was actually, I'd only drawn comics professionally for, I guess it was 2 years before I got Batman. And frankly, looking back on it, I've often wished that I had gotten Batman a year or two later, because I would have been better. But I did develop while I was on Batman, and before that while I was on Whisper. I guess no matter when I'd started, because I was always pushing to develop my abilities, I probably would have in later years looked back on it and said, God, I wish I'd gotten it even later. So I should be happy with when I started Batman. In fact, I really am, because it was a really good time for Batman. And it kind of sealed my position in the comics industry, because the Batman movies came out, and the sales on Batman and Detective Comics were doing really well. You can't get those kind of sales numbers today.
Yeah, well, we know.
I've never really been that aware of the numbers. Even back then, I wasn't aware of the numbers until a couple years later. I just do my job and don't worry about that end of the deal. Just from reading the trade magazines and stuff, that comics they've been in a sales slump ever since the 90s. It's been a long time now.
And you actually also work with Jim Aparo. He was drawing Batman, actually. You were doing the Detective Comics, right? How was the dynamic between you two?
We didn't actually work together. We were working on different titles. I never inked his pencils, or he never inked my pencils, or vice versa. But I was a big fan of his since the early 70s when I first saw his Batman work. In fact, his Batman work was the first stuff that eclipsed Neil Adams for me for a while. So when I met Jim, it was a big thrill. I told him that I was a big fan of his, and yet we never actually worked together per se. So I don't know how to answer your question, except that I really liked him. We were among other things, we went to a Batman Summit conference that DC put together, which was basically a yearly thing where the creators and the editors discuss what's going to be happening on their titles over the next year. And that was the first time I met Jim, actually, and we got along really well. Pete Milligan was there as well. That was when he was doing a little bit of Batman comics, and that was when I met Chuck Dixon. Mm-hmm. Alan Grant was there, of course, but I had already met him. Yeah, Jim was a really sweet guy. Anybody who ever met Jim feels like he was underrated. He didn't really push himself. He didn't sell himself. He didn't go out of his way to do conventions and stuff, although he started doing a few in his later years. But he influenced a lot of people. He had a big influence on me, and he was a really nice fellow. In fact, we traded a couple pages of artwork.
Okay.
That was when I discovered that he was really reluctant to do it, because he said he was holding all of his Batman artwork for his family for after he died. I don't know what they're doing with it, because they've got it all now. I mean, he hardly sold any of his work when he was alive.
Yeah, it's very rare to find an Aparo original from that Batman time.
I wouldn't know. I don't pursue buying others' original artwork. I've got very little bit that I've traded over the years. My attitude is very different than Jim's.
Yeah,
I sold all my stuff as soon as I started going to conventions, and I sold it for peanuts. Like all those Batman covers and Detective Comics covers, those are worth thousands of dollars now. I wish I'd hung on to those, because I sold them for like $100 a piece. Back, shortly after they were published.
I will still give my arm for the Batman 465. That it's the cover you did for the first appearance of Robin in a Batman comic. That it was an homage from the Batman number 9. I love that.
People don't know that was a homage cover. I'm glad you knew that.
Yeah.
Well, Neil Adams designed a very good Robin costume. It stuck around for a long time, and it's still influencing the ones that are being used today.
Yeah, actually. Talking about Robin, I wanted to talk about what was the whole story behind Tim Drake as Robin. Because actually, when you get to DC Comics and doing the Detective Comics, the whole thing of Jason Todd being killed was developing. So actually, you on Detective mainly did mostly Batman stories, but actually in the Batman comics they were killing Jason Todd. And years later, you with Alan Grant work on this huge storyline that made actually Tim Drake as a Robin.
Well, that was because we switched to Batman, and when DC switches over to Batman, it was more the stories that we were doing were more continuity based, and they involved more of the Batman family of characters. Mm-hmm. Before that, we were doing Detective, and actually Alan Grant has said before, I didn't know it at the time, and I was surprised to hear it later. Alan has said before that he preferred working on Detective Comics because he felt he had more freedom from continuity. He didn't have to deal with all these other characters, and that was suited him really well, because although he was a big Batman fan, growing up, he didn't get a consistent supply of Batman comics, and he wasn't really aware of what was going on with all these characters. So it was better that he was on Detective Comics and he was able to create his own stories, because he just didn't know who was available what characters were available and what he could do with them. And I felt just the opposite. Being a big Batman fan, I wanted to draw all those iconic
Joker, Penguin, Scarecrow.
But looking back on it now, I think we made a much bigger long-term impact by creating all those new villains.
Yeah.
And so it's really a lucky thing that that's the way it worked out.
And these new characters were awesome. They were very unique. Something like Amygdala and Scarface.
Scarface is arguably probably the most long-lasting villain that Alan and I created. When I first saw that in the script, it was like an aha moment, a eureka moment. It was like, why hadn't anybody ever done this before for Batman? Because a frightening ventriloquist character had been in pop culture in many different areas for decades. There were a couple episodes of The Twilight Zone where a ventriloquist dummy was coming to life. But, it's like it was already an icon in our culture that ventriloquist dummies were frightening and that ventriloquists might be insane, which is not fair to ventriloquists, of course. But and then there was that book Magic, and it was made into a movie with Anthony Hopkins and Anne Margaret.
Oh yeah.
I read that when I was in high school, and so I was really aware of that motif, and yet I hadn't personally ever thought about using that for Batman either. And as soon as Alan did, it was like, wow, how come nobody else had ever done that? Because it's perfect for Batman. And I think that character's had more legs than probably any of the other characters we created. They'll probably be around indefinitely. I think he's permanent.
Are you still friends or in contact with Alan?
Oh, we're always going to be friends. I'm really well right off the bat, and I just really like Alan. I get the impression, I know he really likes me too. It's like any really good friendship. If you don't speak for a long time, you start talking, it's just like no time has passed. Like the last time we spoke at all on the phone, I actually called him when we were doing a job last summer for DC. It was the first job I did for DC at 10 years, Batman Retroactive, for the 1990s. And not only talking to him was just like it was 20 years earlier, but working with him too. It was just like no time had ever passed. It was very funny to read his scripts and work on a script. It was like, last time I'd done this felt like a week ago. You just don't forget. It's like riding a bike, I guess. Good friends are like bicycles.
So the whole Robin stuff, it was pretty huge at the time. What was the deal behind all this? Did you came with the ideas of bringing Robin back to Batman family, or it was Dennis O'Neil, or?
That would be more a question for Alan Grant to answer. I wish he was here, but I have learned since then that Alan created Anarchy, Anarchy, with the personal, unspoken desire that he craft him to be the new Robin.
Oh.
And so that's what he had in the back of his mind, but he didn't know that Marv Wolfman on Batman and Jim Aparo were already bringing Robin back, and they're crafting Jason Todd, or who was it, Tim Drake, to be the new Robin. There have been a number of Robins now. I mix them up in my mind. So the Anarchy idea of Anarchy becoming Robin ended up falling by the wayside, which is kind of too bad. I think Anarchy would make a great Robin.
Actually, now that you're saying it would be great. Actually, yeah.
Well, it could still be done too. I mean, these characters don't really age. They're comics characters, and even if they do age, you can de-age them. You can even bring back the dead. So, I mean, anything's possible.
You started doing the pencils for the comic books. When did you start doing drawings for the paintings actually for
covers?
For covers.
Well, I did the first Batman job I did for DC. Well, actually, the second one, the Crime Doctor story in Detective Comics. I did the cover for that. That was more or less a tryout issue, and because Denny O'Neil liked it, they asked me to be the regular artist. I was willing to do covers from the beginning, and I wanted to ink my stuff from the beginning. They did let me ink the first year or two on Detective Comics, but then they, from what I understand, there was a universal policy decided that pencilers shouldn't be inking their own pencils, probably because of deadline pressures, although I always met my deadline, so it always irked me that somebody else was inking my pencils. Looking back on it, though, my inking techniques weren't fully developed, actually. I mean, it took a few more years before. I've never had any professional training as a comics artist. I had professional training as an artist, but not as a comics artist, and not really in pen and ink per se. So it was kind of a hit and miss thing for me, and it wasn't until a few years after that I started really developing professional inking techniques. So when I look back on it, Steve Mitchell was definitely a better inker than I was. So it made sense that he would be inking my pencils. As for the paintings, I don't remember which was the first painting. It might have been the anniversary issue 627, or maybe it was the inserts, the Clayface inserts in Detective Comics. Okay. But I had developed my painting way back when I was taking those private art lessons that I mentioned when I was 14 years old. Mm-hmm. I was a painting major in college before I was an illustration major, in fact. So my painting skills were always there. In fact, like I said, one of those portfolios I had sent to Marvel in DC of all the originals, the really large originals, a lot of those were paintings, full color paintings. Oh. So, in fact, I would love to be doing paintings now. It's just that I haven't. Well, I do some paintings for clients outside of comics these days, every now and then.
Okay. Commercial art or private commissions?
Commercial art, yeah. Haven't done a private commission painting in a long time. I'm not sure when the last one would have been. But yeah, commercial art. I've got a representative in London called Debut Art that finds illustration jobs for me. Many of which I have to turn down just because the comics work keeps me too busy. But I like to keep my hands in both pies, my fingers in both pies if I can. One of these days, I've been saying this for decades, but one of these days I'm going to stop all of my commercial work and concentrate on my own projects. Some of them will be comics, some of them will not be comics. Some of them will be a mixture of illustration and comics. I would like to do some full-color comics, some full-color, fully painted comics work again. The last time I did that was kind of under deadline pressures, was Birth of the Demon, The Origin of Ra's al Ghul. Yeah.
It's gorgeous. I still love that comic book. I hold it as a personal favorite. I actually love everything about that book. Story, your paintings, I love them. Actually, I wanted to also to ask you about this because I always was curious. What was your technique? I'm a graphic designer, and a lot of my interest in comics were primarily thank you to you. So I was very curious because I couldn't find exactly what was the technique you used for doing the painting.
We didn't have the internet back then. You could have asked me personally. I just happened to go in detail about my technique for that book about a month ago on Facebook.
Ah, okay.
I had posted one of the pages of Batman Birth of the Demon, and somebody else in the comments thread asked me the same question. Mm-hmm. So I wish I had it in front of me so I could just read it off, but I could tell you from memory. They were all done on smooth illustration board. Mm-hmm. What I would do first is I pencil them as small thumbnails, like about this big, 4 by 6 inches or so. And I was using my brother as an assistant at that point. So I sent him the thumbnails and the illustration boards, and he enlarged them with a projector onto the illustration boards, and then taped off with painter's tape or drafting tape all the panel borders that I left white, and sent them back to me. And then the way that I painted it was basically this. I drew everything in brown Rotring artist colors. Mm-hmm. Basically, I inked it like a normal comics page in brown.
Okay.
And then when that dried, I started adding layers of transparent, permanent colors. And I was using at the time Rotring artist colors, which they don't produce anymore, which is too bad because I love those. But they're more or less like Dr. Martin's waterproof watercolor dyes.
Oh, okay.
So I built up layers of color that way, and then I would use some opaque colors, like some whites and some acrylics for certain effects. And then I would darken the shadows with black. And that was it. Basically, what I was striving to do was to come up with a technique that approached full-color painting, that kind of looked like full-color painting, but that was more like comics drawing, so it was faster because of the deadline pressure. When I first started that book, I was still developing the techniques, and the first few pages took me a couple of days each before I really knew what I was doing. By the end of the book, I was doing a page a day.
Wow.
That was really fast.
Yeah, and it was a big project. There was, I think, 105 pages or so. So I remember Archie Goodwin, my editor, was very surprised at how quickly I turned those pages out. I was kind of proud of that. But, that's deadlines for you. There's the deadline pressures have been both a curse and a blessing. Mostly a blessing, because They force me to develop my techniques. They force me to not overthink things. But at the same time, sometimes you really want to think about things. Sometimes you really want to take your time. Luckily, I've always had the attitude ever since I was a kid. I like working fast. I like, I guess, I'm a typical American male. I want an instant gratification. I always enjoyed drawing swiftly, and I've always liked techniques that look like they were done quickly, too. Although I also appreciate people like Brian Boland and, more super realistic, highly detailed effects. I've always tended to appreciate and gravitate towards techniques that show the technique on the surface. So, like, you can tell that a brushstroke is a brushstroke. Japanese watercolor techniques I've always really loved, too. In fact, I like watercolor in general because of its spontaneity.
How was working with Mr. O'Neill, with Denny O'Neill?
Oh, Denny was great. I happen to agree with him philosophically on almost everything. We both come from a similar, more or less leftist political viewpoint, although there are a couple areas we disagree. But not that any of that really is either here nor there, although that's one of the reasons I think that we got along really well. As an editor, he was great because he let the creative people free, pretty much.
Okay.
He wasn't a heavy-handed editor at all. And I've worked with a wide variety of editors now, and I suppose almost any creator would say the same thing. They prefer a lighter touch from the editor. Denny was like that. He would only step in if there was something very definite that had to be changed or said. Working with Denny, like working beside Jim Aparo, was a dream come true because Denny O'Neill and
was a writer with the
team on Batman when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And I was constantly feeling like I was living a dream at the time,
And actually doing the origin of Ra's al Ghul.
I'm really proud to have been the one to have done that. That was neat. They originally, Dick Giordano, who was president of DC Comics at the time, he was the one who invited me to do that project. And he had assumed that it was going to be black and white on my end and that it would just be colored like traditional comics. But I insisted that it be full colored. He didn't really understand why. I guess I never really made it clear to him why either. But it ended up being really good because they were all mostly desert scenes, so they really lent themselves well to subtleties of color. If I had just drawn it in traditional drawing techniques, I don't think it would have captured that feeling of the desert as well.
Actually, we can talk about the Birth of the Demon maybe an hour. I personally loved it. I still got chills with this painting, the bat with the shovel in his chest.
That was great. That's Denny O'Neill at his best. I mean, that proves why Denny was the top Batman editor and top Batman writer for so long. He really had a good feeling for that character. And it's interesting because he's so leftist like I am, and Batman on the surface appears to be almost a fascist.
Yeah.
And yet both he and I always thought of Batman as more of a humanistic character inside. He wore the mantle of the Bat to frighten criminals, but he was a very liberal person. That's the way we viewed him. I can't stand the idea that Batman would be a right-wing fascist.
Do you clash with Chuck Dixon? I see Chuck Dixon as the opposite spectrum. I think he's very Republican and very conservative. I think he's the opposite from you and Denny.
That's true, but he's a really likable fellow, and I've never had any problems with him. I think we disagreed on Facebook a couple of times, but it remained friendly. We have mutual respect, and I think he's half crazy about a lot of things, but he feels the same way about me.
But he's a great writer.
He can't prove me wrong.
How did you landed working for Malibu Comics?
I'd been drawing Batman for like 6 or 7 years at that point, and the independent comics market was opening up, and there were a lot of deals going on. That was around the time that Image Comics had started. It was actually only about a year after Image Comics had started. And I was feeling the itch to do something new, and Malibu Comics offered me a really nice deal, a sweet deal that even if I wasn't itching to do something new, it would have been difficult to turn down. They offered me a good signing fee, but what really clinched the deal for me was when they offered to publish my own character, Sight Unseen, which ended up being the 6-issue Metaphysique run that I did for Malibu's Bravura imprint. And that was like the birth of the writer in me too, actually. So that pretty much sums it up. Of course, right halfway through Metaphysique, my production of Metaphysique, after doing a year on Prime, that's when the independent comics market imploded. I had to actually renegotiate my contract if I wanted all of Metaphysique to be published, all 6 issues, and I did the last 3 issues for free. I could afford it at that point because I had been doing well enough up till then. But then after that, it was tough finding work. I mean, I went back to DC, I looked at other companies, everybody was hanging on to their jobs like grim death. A lot of people looking for work because the industry had imploded. The only thing that turned up for me was Anarchy, and that was actually suggested by Darren Vincenzo, one of the editors at DC Comics at the time, that Alan Grant and I do Anarchy. Alan was against the idea because Alan didn't think Anarchy was a strong enough character to hold his own monthly title. So I actually kind of had to talk Alan into doing it, largely because I needed the work. And he was right, we got a good maybe 1.5 to 2 years out of it total if you include the miniseries, and he and I are both proud of it. But he was right, apparently. It wasn't a strong enough character to maintain a monthly title. But we're both proud of that miniseries and the year or 2 that we got out of the ongoing.
Do you like working in Prime?
Prime was a blast. It was because he was, well, for a number of reasons. One, because he was so different than Batman. Like I said, I've been drawing Batman for like 6 or 7 years, and I was ready for a change. And Prime was a really big change. I mean, literally a big change.
Yeah.
Instead of a sophisticated, jaded adult like Bruce Wayne, he was an innocent. He was on the West Coast instead of the East Coast. He transformed into the superhero that was naive and highly muscular and really bright colored. The opposite of Batman in every way. So it was a real blast to draw that, especially all the bombastic fight scenes and the visual effects, something I never got in Batman. Batman, the fight scenes were always fun to design in Batman, but you didn't get to see Batman, lifting tanks and bringing buildings down.
Rocking walls.
Right. So it was a nice change for me. I really enjoyed it. It's too bad it didn't last longer. After I finished Metaphysique, that was when that was when the industry imploded. And I thought I'd be going back to Prime, but Malibu was apparently negotiating with Marvel at that point, and they were getting George Perez and other people to work on Prime, and then then Marvel ended up buying Malibu and then doing nothing with the characters, so there was no Prime for me either. In fact, to this day, they own the multiverse. Too bad, because I would love to draw more Prime.
You also work for Archie Comics.
That was something I never expected.
Actually,
I think nobody.
Neither do us.
I don't think anybody did, yeah. I was at I worked for A First Salvo, which I don't know if you guys ever saw, not a lot of people probably knew about. They're a comics company, a small few-person operation out of Bermuda. I've become good friends with Thad and some of the other people working there. My job with them was just coming to a close. They were running out of money, basically, to publish their comics. And they had invited me to go to, they had actually paid for me to go to one of the New York conventions and to Bermuda to meet them personally, which was a lot of fun because I'd never been to Bermuda before. But while I was at the New York convention, I went around Artist Alley and I saw Joe Staten. And he had a bunch of Archie comics that he'd drawn in front of him, and I didn't know that he'd drawn Archie at that point, and thought that was really interesting. And I don't think I even met Joe at that point. So we were speaking for a while. As we were speaking, Mike Pellerito, I guess he's the president at Archie Comics, came by, and Joe introduced him to me, and it was Mike's idea that I do something for Archie, and I said, well, sure, it's possible. I didn't know at that point yet that my present job with First Salvo was coming to an end. But a couple months later it did, and so I contacted Mike Pellerito, and the rest is history, as they say. It was a lot more enjoyable than I expected. I just took it on as a job. I mean, I was aware of Archie. I remember enjoying Archie comics when I was a kid, but I never really wanted to draw Archie because, I was influenced by the more realistic, dramatic school of drawing, like represented by Neil Adams when I was a kid. And yet I had drawn a backup feature at the beginning of my career called Bob Violence for First Comics, titled Whisper. And it was in a cartoony style, so I knew I could handle it. And it turned out to be really not that much of a change at all. What I learned is that as long as you get the formula for the faces of the characters down and the body proportions right, everything can be more or less realistic. I mean, Archie's a fairly realistic style of drawing. I mean, it can be really cartoony, but, you know, you've got perspective if you want it. Actually, traditionally, they didn't have it, but I brought it in. A lot more perspective and more heavy shadows. And I guess partly because of that, they decided that they were going to make the format a different format, and they made it a magazine format, which was really a surprise to me, a really pleasant surprise, too, because it was high-quality paper. When I first saw the first issues and the digital coloring on the high-quality paper, I was really impressed. I was really happy that I was doing it. By the way, you guys probably have heard that that title, Life with Archie, was nominated for an Eisner Award.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was the first project I've ever been involved in that has been so, which is funny because I've been in comics for so long and I never thought it would be with an Archie title. Yeah, I ended up really enjoying it. In fact, I might be doing some more Archie work. I can't really say anything about it more than that at this point, but I might be doing some more as well while I maintain the Batman Beyond work.
Actually, that was the following question. How did
Do you end up in Batman?
in Batman Beyond? Yeah.
Well, I had 10 years ago, and I guess because things were changing a lot and maybe because I was a really well-known entity and DC editors had changed over and they wanted to find new creators and stuff, DC and Marvel both stopped hiring me entirely out of the blue, and I never expected that. So it was hard times for a little while before I picked up the pieces and I started doing illustrations outside of comics, and I found other comics work as well. But I kept approaching DC for a few years afterwards, and it became apparent that there was nothing there for me. So I had written them off entirely. Until last summer, I was very surprised to get a call from Jim Chadwick, the editor on Batman Beyond, asking me to do Batman Retroactive. I was very surprised. My initial email response to him was embarrassing because I was so surprised. I didn't think that would ever happen. I guess because they liked that. After that, Jim offered me the art chores on Batman Beyond. So that's all I can say about it. I mean, it's just like any other job that I've ever had, you know. I don't know why they approached me. Well, Jim did tell me that Hank Canals had suggested me to Jim, and Hank had worked with me on the Ultraverse at Malibu. So I guess maybe that could be said to be why. But as to why DC decided they could hire me again, I don't know. Maybe it's just enough time has passed, so everything old is new again.
I think your popularity helped you with that. I mean, a lot of people where are those guys from the back now? I need them right now in a Batman title.
Yeah, that's true. I heard a lot about that too. And I know that Dan Didio and other editors at DC have been approached many times at conventions as well, asking about Alan Grant and myself. A lot of people had told me, well, it's just a matter of time, Norm, before you're back with DC. And I said, well, I'll wait and see. It doesn't really matter anymore because I had picked up the pieces of my career and I was getting enough work, so I didn't really need DC, which is kind of nice, actually. To not be dependent on one publisher.
Yeah.
I know now that I'm not dependent on any one publisher and I can make a living as an artist, even if Marvel and DC both died. And I don't want them to. I want them to stick around because I consider DC to be my first professional home, probably my most important professional home.
How different is to draw Batman to do Batman Beyond?
Biggest difference is no cape.
I really love your cape on Batman. The way you move and the way you draw it, I really loved it, actually.
Well, that was one of the best things about drawing Batman. That's why I'm sure that's one of the main reasons I was attracted to Batman as a fan, was because of the cape and because of what artists did with the cape. It works really well in comics. In live action, it doesn't work as well because it tends to get in the way. That's one of the things that makes Batman uniquely a comics character, I think more importantly a comics character than a film character, is because he straddles the worlds of reality and fantasy so well in comics, and it's a lot harder to do in film because of that cape, largely, but also other things. Just the idea of running around in a costume without superpowers, pretty absurd when you get too realistic about it. But in comics, it works, you know. I'm sorry, what was the question? I was going somewhere.
What's the difference between drawing Batman, the regular Batman, and Batman Beyond?
Well, so because I like the cape so much, I utilized that element a lot while I was drawing Batman. And when I first took on Batman Beyond, I thought I was going to miss the cape. And at first I did a little bit, but now, after drawing Batman without a cape and with these wings that pop out when he wants to glide, I guess I'm feeling, it's funny, the other week I was thinking how the cape was feeling kind of archaic to me. You know, kind of old-fashioned and impractical. all the things that I already knew logically, but that I just disregarded, for the suspension of disbelief required for Batman. So I can't say that I really even miss the cape anymore. Batman Beyond has its own things that make it really interesting to draw, like Gotham City of the future. The architecture is fun. Coming up with new designs for flying cars and things like that. There are a lot of them that I borrow from things that I see on the internet. A lot of futurist artists have designed flying cars and cars of the future and cities of the future, things like that. I'm going to be using those more and more, I think, in Batman Beyond. And also the fact that he flies in his boot jets, that's a lot of fun to do. And the fact that his costume is all black, it's a really good design that Bruce Timm came up with. It's very striking. It's all black and red. That's basically very simple, except for the silver belt.
Yeah.
Simple and dynamic is usually better than complex, if you ask me. Not always, but usually.
But but you work pretty good with the black color. I always considered your style very close to the chiaroscuro. I think that you work a lot with the black shadow of Batman with the cowl, just the shadow and the white eyes. The
eyelids.
Yeah, it really worked actually. That was one of the things I most enjoyed about your work, because you work pretty good with shadows, and that thing actually comes back on the Batman Beyond network.
That's true. Batman Beyond is kind of like permanently the way some people would draw Batman, the traditional Batman, if he's silhouetted from by a light from behind. Yeah. What I've discovered is that Archie really brought home to me the fact that when I take on a job, it doesn't really matter what the job is. If I take it on, I'm going to find something in it that I really enjoy. And I ended up really enjoying Archie, and that's a lot more than I expected I would, because, there aren't any fight scenes. It's basically a bunch of talking heads. And yet I had developed enough as a comic storyteller and artist to find that a challenge. It is a challenge to make page after page of people talking, visually dynamic. And that was the challenge of Archie, and I found myself really enjoying it. So if I can enjoy that, I can enjoy, I think, drawing anything. Which isn't saying, it isn't to cut down Archie, it's just that when I got into comics when I was a kid, I always wanted to draw the fight scenes.
Yeah, sure.
Explosions and the fight scenes and the costumes, and so I could draw the human body, human anatomy better than I could draw cars and buildings when I was like 14 years old. And the backgrounds in my comics that I was producing for myself at the time, the backgrounds were really simplistic box-like structures. The buildings, obviously I didn't know anything about architecture. And yet the bodies that I was drawing were quite sophisticated. Now, however, I enjoy drawing everything. I enjoy drawing a building. I enjoy drawing animals. I enjoy drawing cars, natural scenes. In fact, I think that's one of my better strengths as an artist and as a comic book artist, is that my style lends itself to any genre.
Yeah.
I could draw funny animals if I want. I could draw Archie. I can draw really realistic stuff. I can paint in full color. And I'm not aping anybody. I'm not imitating the Image Comics Jim Lee style. Not even imitating Neil Adams. In fact, I made a conscious effort not to imitate Neil Adams, even when I was a kid, when I was drawing for myself, because I intuitively knew that would channel me towards looking like somebody else. I wanted to develop my own style.
And you did it. Actually, one of the things I was thinking when we were planning the interview is you got your pretty unique style. It's not many of the artists at the same time they
were Jim Lee, Silvestri ripoffs, or they were from the old school, Ramirez, Buscema, Adams, and you were some kind of odd guy.
In a good way, I mean.
Right. Well, I think that's because I learned to draw from life and from other sources. My training wasn't all insularly related to comic books. I mean, I always loved comics, and I was always reading comics and drawing my own comics, but I was also drawing portraits and landscapes and painting things. So I was trained as an artist in general, not just as a comics artist. So it wasn't like I was trying. Even though I was heavily influenced by Neil Adams, I wasn't really, although my earlier stuff, just before, when I was still developing as an amateur, some of my stuff was heavily influenced by Neil Adams. I remember one of the samples I sent to Heavy Metal magazine before I turned pro. The response was that I forget who wrote the response, some editor at Heavy Metal. He said he liked my work, but he hoped that I would get away from that Neil Adams inspired style. And I didn't even realize how much I had been inspired by Adams at that point. And I still am largely. I mean, I'm mainstream. It's funny, yeah, I've got a unique style, but I am basically quite mainstream, you know. Although if I want to do something outside of the mainstream, I could do it easily enough. I guess it's not like I really try to avoid being pigeonholed. It's just that it's all graphic art to me, you know. You can approach each job in its own way and on its own merits, and I don't really personally, I don't make a big distinction between mainstream and avant-garde. I never did.
Talking about avant-garde, I wanted to talk the Batman Beyond is doing this kind of thing DC is plugging digital first comics. Actually, it's designed to be displayed on a tablet or to see it online. But I wanted to ask if it's any different doing the work for this maybe more kind of landscape drawings.
It's a good question. It's a pertinent question too, because after the first issue that I did of Batman Beyond, I drew that before they had decided it was going to be a digital comic.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
And you can see a big difference between the page layouts between the first issue and the second issue, because after the first issue, all of the page layouts are designed to be broken up into two horizontal tablet proportions. Yeah. So there's basically an area right halfway in the middle of the page where all the panels don't cross over. Yeah. And the challenge has been, it's just another challenge to me that I find interesting, and it hasn't been, I haven't felt that it's been restricting, not very restricting. It is a little restricting when it comes to like double page spreads and even single page spreads. That's been a constant new wrinkle that we've been dealing with. But generally speaking, the pages look fine, I think, when I design them for the digital format. What I'm aiming for is, what all of us are aiming for, is that they will be fine as in print and digitally. And yeah, it's a challenge. You don't want to make it too obvious that there's a line right down the middle, you know, right through the middle. And if you look for it, you can see that, oh yeah, every page is like that. I think a lot of people that realize that for the first time would go, yeah, I didn't notice that. Because it's really not that noticeable. But yeah, it is something we have to keep in mind. That's the only real difference.
What would be the character you would like to draw you haven't drawn yet?
There are a number of characters that I would really enjoy drawing even more than others. Although, like I said, I enjoy drawing any job that I take on. But certain characters I really would enjoy drawing would be the Hulk, because of the anatomy, and because of, you know, the bombastic explosions and stuff. That would be a blast. Doctor Strange and magically related characters. I really enjoyed drawing the Spectre for a while because of the mystical qualities, the magical energy effect, things like that, and that's a lot of fun. It's kind of like Batman has his cape, the Hulk has his muscles, the magical characters have their energy effects, and what else? I guess if I were to draw a Wonder Woman, I would have to really hone my ability to draw beautiful women. That would probably be a good idea. If I were to choose something, I might choose Wonder Woman. Not that I really want to draw Wonder Woman, but just that I think I would benefit the most from that, because beautiful women are probably the most difficult thing to draw.
Yeah, I agree.
And children. And the reason is because if you put in too many lines, you know, you make them look older. You make it looks like wrinkles or something. So you have to have the minimal amount of lines, kind of like with Archie comics. You got to have the minimal amount of lines for the effect. And Archie is more challenging to draw than one might realize for that reason. But yeah, maybe Wonder Woman or some female character. When I drew Whisper for First Comics way back in the beginning of my career, I wasn't really that good at drawing women yet. I mean, I did okay. And luckily the stories were so starkly realistic that my style suited it pretty well. But I think that's probably the one area where I can still use some development, is drawing beautiful women and painting beautiful women. It's a difficult subject.
I remember I think your only series from Marvel, Hellcat. So do you have any?
It's a lot of fun because it had both of the beautiful women in it, and it had all those magical effects. And it was a Marvel job. And I was really happy. I'm still really happy with the results of that. And Steve Englehart, the writer on that miniseries, and I are both disappointed that Marvel didn't want to do more with us, because I thought we did a good job.
They even push it in the Avengers limited series, in paperbacks.
Right, yeah, that's right. I had drawn a couple I did an Avengers annual and I think it What was the other? Thunderbolts annual. Those are both fun. I thought it was opening up a new realm for me with Marvel. I would have loved to have continued working for Marvel. I don't know why that didn't pan out. Maybe in the future. I don't know. I was always more of a DC fan than a Marvel fan when I was a kid. Don't really make a distinction now. It's all comic storytelling.
I need to ask you something. The design for Tim Drake, the Robin suit, where is it now? I know Neil designed it, but where is the original drawing? Do you have it? DC Comics have it? Neil Adams have it?
Oh, there's a whole bunch of them. There were something like 10 or so artists that were asked by DC, that were conscripted and paid by DC to come up with Robin costume designs. Neil Adams was one of them. Jim Aparo did a bunch of them. I did a bunch of them. A number of other people, Graham Nolan, I won't remember all the other artists, but a whole bunch of us, like 10 of us. And they ended up going with Neil Adams' design, with some elements that I had designed too. Like, for instance, Tim Drake carrying a staff, Robin carrying a staff, was my idea. Nobody else had drawn that into their costume designs. And also the R symbol on his chest. I was the only one who had really radically altered the R symbol on his chest. And what they ended up using was not the one that Neil Adams was using in his design. It was much more akin to what I was using in my design. But other than that, it was all Neil Adams' design. A lot of our designs, a lot of the artists came up with some very similar designs. Some of my designs were very similar to Adams' design, but technically it was Adams' design, yeah. So, what happened to the originals? Well, I don't know what happened to Neil's, but I know that I sold all of mine, just like I sold everything back then for peanuts.
That reminds me, John Byrne, I don't know if he said it or write it, that he regrets selling his X-Men art because he also sold it for peanuts. It's like, damn, I will be rich right now.
Right, yeah.
I think he sold the Death of Phoenix for something like $80 a page or something like that.
I bet you almost every artist can say that, I mean, we can't tell. None of us can predict the future. None of us know how big certain things are going to be. I mean, I guess we're a little bit better at it now because there have been many decades now. When I was a kid, the original artists and writers on Batman and Detective Comics, like Dick Sprang, would say things like, I had no idea that there would be conventions and that people would still be wanting to see me and that they'd be talking about my work after all these years. Well, that's pretty much true for all of us, Not as true as it used to be, though. I mean, I'm not that surprised that people are still aware of my Batman stuff, but I'm still quite surprised. I mean, it's been 20 years since I was drawing Batman on a regular basis, and I still get royalty checks for merchandise created based on characters that Alan Grant and I created, like the ventriloquist. I never expected that back then when we were producing those stories. I did always kind of feel, though, that what I was doing, I knew that I was going to be stuck with that in my history for the rest of my life. So I always felt, whenever I was drawing Batman, I always felt like this is stuff I have to live with for the rest of my life. So I have to try to do the best job I can under deadline pressure. So I was always aware of that.
All for now.
It's all for now. I hope
That was a lot of fun.
As we said, we are huge fans of your work. Always been. It's been
an honor.
An honor to talk to you. We really love your work, and I just wanted to do a little suggestion. Now that you're working on Batman Beyond, I would love to see a cover painted for Batman Beyond by you. If you can push that idea to DC, you will make me a very happy person.
I will bring it up. I don't know if they're using any painted covers, but I will bring it up, yeah. I would love to be doing the covers in general. At this point, I haven't suggested anything beyond what they've suggested because I don't want to look a gift horse in the mouth. Mm-hmm. I thought that I was never going to be working for DC again. So I'm happy to do whatever they ask me to do, frankly, as long as it doesn't violate any principles. And DC would never violate any principles, not really.
El tiempo se ha agotado. Te esperamos la semana entrante para más información con Héctor Negrete, el Graf. La Cueva del Nerd. Recuerda buscarnos en iTunes, Podbean, iVoox o descarga directa en lacuevadelnerd.com.